Okay, so let us start now. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Emmanuel Gan. I'm Senior Analyst at the World Trade Organization, and I will be your host during this event. So today's event is the second edition of the Global Trade and Blockchain Forum, but the third event organized by the WTO to further explore how blockchain and distributed ledger technology can shape international trade and the role that governments can play to unlock the potential of this technology. Before giving the floor to our distinguished speakers, I would like to thank our WTO interpreters who provide us today with real-time interpretation in French, English, and Spanish. So if you want to listen to interpretation, you can click on the globe symbol, which is at the bottom of your screen. I also would like to thank our technical team who can help you address any technical issue you may have during the event. Now, please note that this event is recorded and that it is live streamed. The recording and the speakers' presentations will be uploaded on the WTO webpage of the event after today's session. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our three distinguished speakers for this opening session. First, Mr. Zhao Zhongyi, who is Deputy Director General of the WTO, Mr. John Denton, who is Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Liu Chuan-Hong, who is CEO of Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore. So without further ado, over to you, DDG.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second edition of the WTO Global Trade and Blockchain Forum. Let me begin by thanking our Economic Research and Statistics Division for having put this event all together. A lot has happened since the first forum we held in December 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic has shaken the world, causing massive supply chain disruptions and threatening the lives and the livelihood of millions of people. It has supply chain inefficiencies and the record seizures of faulty and counterfeit masks and other personal protective equipment in the US, Australia, and other places have highlighted the vulnerability of the medical device supply chain and the need for greater integrity and provenance of medical supplies and other critical products. The pandemic has also brought to the fore that archaism of trade processes still largely based on paper, with dire consequences on business operations in times of lockdown. It has brought into sharp focus the need to urgently digitalize these outdated paper-based processes. The last 12 months have shown that going digital is no longer optional. It is a matter of survival for many companies, in particular the smallest ones, who have been hit very hard by the current crisis. So how can we bring trade digitalization to its next level? In spite of all the efforts made over the last decades, the adoption of electronic bills of lading, which is a key document in international trade remains ridiculously low at 0.1%. How can we accelerate trade digitalization to build back better? 10 advanced technologies, in particular, distributed ledger technology, commonly referred to as blockchain, help to address the risks and inefficiencies in global supply chains and strengthen trade resilience. Today's event will dive into these issues. It will explore how technology, in particular, distributed ledger technology, can be leveraged to enhance transparency and efficiency of supply chains and trade processes. It will discuss the latest blockchain developments in trade and trade finance, and how trade digitalization can be accelerated to the benefit of all developed and developing economies, large and small companies. It will also provide an opportunity to explore the importance of digital identity for trade digitalization, a topic that is starting to emerge, although still timidly, in trade discussions. But we all know that technology is only a tool, that trade digitalization cannot happen in a regulatory vacuum. Today's final session will discuss the role that governments and international organizations can play to support the development of a regulatory and a policy framework conducive to trade digitalization and to the deployment of distributed ledger technology. I'm delighted that we have with us today two keynote speakers who will share their vision of blockchain for trade. First, Mr. John Denton, Secretary of the International Chamber of Commerce. The ICC has been digitalization agenda very actively and recently launched a new initiative, the ICC Digital Standards Initiative, which aims at addressing the digital island problem, the fact that many of the projects that are being developed follow a siloed and disconnected approach, leading to fragmentation between systems and the networks that prevents end-to-end trade digitalization. I would like to thank the ICC for having extended invitation to the WTO to participate in the governing board of this initiative to advance trade digitalization work at a practical level in a public-private cooperation spirit. Having all stakeholders involved in this work is critical. Our second keynote speaker is Mr. Chung Chuan Hong, who is CEO of Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore. Singapore has been spearheading work on blockchain for trade. Mr. Liu Chuan Hong will share with us some of the initiatives they have been working on to promote trade digitalization. We are also launching today a new publication with the International Chamber of Commerce and the Trade Finance Global, entitled Accelerating Trade Digitalization to Support MISME Financing. The publication explores how digital technologies such as blockchain, but also big data analytics, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, optical recognition character, and application programming interfaces can facilitate MISME's access to finance. We are all acutely aware of the challenges that MISMEs face in accessing financing. The MISME financing gap is a reality that cannot be ignored and that needs to be tackled with determination if we wish to ensure that small players are given a chance to thrive. Indeed, for many micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises around the world today, access to financing can make the difference between prosperity and bankruptcy. Based on a survey of 104 practitioners in the field and more than 30 qualitative interviews, this publication aims to shed light on the opportunities that technology will open to make SMEs access to finance, including more accessible. It discusses the challenges standing on the path to adoption and outlines a multi-pronged approach to unleash the potential of digital technologies to facilitate SME financing. We are also announcing today the launch of an online introduction course on blockchain for trade, developed jointly with International Trade Center. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the ITC team for their support and help in producing this course. The course, which will be officially launched in the coming weeks, appeals to technical and non-technical audience alike and will be freely accessible through both ITC SME Trade Academy and the WTO e-learning platforms. The lectures have a particular SME focus. They examine the opportunities that blockchain technology may create for small producers and enterprises, especially those located in developing countries. Session 3 of today's forum will give you the opportunity to learn more about the content of this course and how you can register to take it. I hope that today's discussion will provide useful insights and food for thought on the issue of trade digitalization, and that ideas that emerge will help guide members' thinking and actions going forward. We have a fantastic set of speakers with us, so I have no doubt that it will be a very productive event. Enjoy your discussions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, DGE, for your opening remarks. Now let me turn to John Denton for the first keynote. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and it's a pleasure and an honour to follow DGE. We shout out and thank you very much for the kind words you've said about the International Chamber of Commerce. And as you know, we have an abiding interest in the success of the WTO, so working with you is a real pleasure. As many of you will know, ICC is the institutional representative of more than 45 million businesses in over 100 countries in the North and the South and the developed and developing world. We are a purpose-led institution with a mission to make business work for everyone, every day, everywhere. That mission has arguably never been as vital in the face of COVID-19 since our founding over a century ago in the aftermath of the First World War and in the midst of the Spanish flu. As we have said repeatedly, business solutions are essential to progressively ending the pandemic. The key challenge is to make those tools, tests, treatments, vaccines, and other technologies readily available to everyone, everywhere, every day. Our consistent message is that only global action in partnership with the global private sector will be effective in lifting the grip of the novel coronavirus over lives and livelihoods throughout the world. Related to that, and speaking directly to the theme of today's discussion, we at ICC have also been clear that the response to the pandemic and any future rebuild must leverage digital technologies for the benefit of all. Friends, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we strongly condemned the escalation of protectionist trade measures, which actually impeded access to secure essential goods and medical equipment throughout the world. The closures of national borders, the impositions of tariffs, and the introduction of export controls have hindered, and my friends continue to hinder, efforts to mitigate the human economic effects of the pandemic. Faced with the proliferation of my country first approaches, ICC did what it has always done in times of global crisis, and under my leadership, we decided to challenge convention and to act. And in doing so, we adopted a digital-first approach. Most notably, we decided to advocate a risk management approach to restarting global mobility and to develop a solution to safely restore global mobility in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We developed a digital tool, ICC AOK Pass, a risk mitigation tool that allows users to safely present digitally authenticated and secure COVID-19 test results or vaccination records to border authorities with a simple QR code scan. ICC AOK Pass is backed by blockchain technology. ICC AOK Pass does not collect personal or medical data and is a much more efficient and reliable alternative to the collection of paper-based documentation at ports of departure. So far, we have conducted multiple pilots and we've implemented them around the world, providing recognition for recognized test results and vaccines and restarting global mobility. The participants include leading airlines, governments, and private sector partners. And right now, we're right in the middle of conducting a month-long pilot with Air France on all flights from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris to San Francisco and Los Angeles. We've already conducted successful pilots with Alitalia, Air Carib, French Bee, Etihad, Sanofi, and now the Singapore Immigration Authority. And we are piloting right now this approach and opening a safe economic ecosystem in the city of Girona in Spain. And if it works, we'll be able to scale that throughout Spain. So watch this space for more. Friends, by standardizing health and technology protocols, we believe that ICC AOK Pass can safely reopen local economies, providing much needed relief for SMEs without waiting for the rollout of vaccines. If leading virologists are correct that COVID-19 may be with us for many years to come, more digitally enabled solutions will be needed to create safe spaces for economic activity to resume. The global economy cannot be simply put on ice indefinitely. And why prolong the human and economic pain of doing so when technologies exist that can be readily deployed to restart and restore cross-border economic activity while guarding against the unfettered spread of the virus? This takes me to the broader point. The role of digital technologies in enabling a trade-led rebound from the COVID-19 crisis. We have all spoken for years about the potential for digital platforms and blockchain solutions to democratize access to the global trading system. With struggling SMEs desperately needing new sources of demand, it is high time to finally deliver on that promise if we are to deliver a truly resilient and durable recovery in the years ahead. Governments must lead from the front in this regard. And on many of the issues up for discussion at today's event, antiquated policy frameworks too often hold back adoption of digital trade solutions, forcing reliance on cumbersome and costly paper-based processes. By way of example, while US e-commerce saw user growth of around 40%, that's right, 40% last year as a result of social distancing and lockdown measures, more than 99% of key trade documents, such as bills of lading, remain in paper format. In short, global trade seems to be the one area of the economy immune to the rapid digitalization affected by the pandemic. This is one type of immunity that we cannot afford to have as lasting, which is why we are calling on all governments to adopt laws to give full legal effect to electronic trade documents, most fundamentally by adopting the UNCITRAL model law on electronic transferable records, following the lead already of Bahrain and Singapore, and I shout out to IMDA here. Business also needs to get its own house in order. The existing digital trade platform market is simply not delivering for SMEs and the real economy. Adoption of digital trade platforms and e-documents are held back today by excessive complexity and fragmentation, which for SMEs ultimately means one thing: undue costs. That's why last September we stepped in and launched the ICC Digital Trade Standards Initiative that DGE just mentioned, to leverage our convening power and standard-setting experience to accelerate the adoption of common industry standards for digital trade documents, processes, and platforms. We are rapidly moving to identify and, where needed, establish new standards and rules working openly with businesses of all shapes and sizes across the trading ecosystem. And I shout out to Oz, who'll be speaking later, our MD of DSI. If you're not involved in this initiative already, we'd encourage you to reach out to us to explore how your company can best engage. We've also been delighted to receive the strong support from the Asian Development Bank, the Government of Singapore, and most recently, the WTO, making the Digital Standards Initiative the definitive global effort to enable the industry harmonization needed to finally accelerate trade digitalization. We believe that policy reforms and industry standards will have a transformational effect in finally shedding the reliance of world trade on paper documents. We are taking trade from analog to digital, but awareness of and access to solutions also needs to be broadened in the fallout from COVID-19. The particular issue I want to focus on now is access to trade finance, because it's a prime example of this challenge. Today, over 45% of SMEs see their requests for trade finance rejected and often struggle to find alternative sources of funding. Without adequate access to capital, SMEs are effectively cut away from international markets and unable to grow their operations to meet international demand. This is not a situation we at ICC can allow to perpetuate in the aftermath of COVID-19. SMEs emerging from the greatest demand shock in history with weak balance sheets will need access to new markets and adequate finance if we are to avert a downwards economic cycle reminiscent of the 1930s. The importance of this agenda cannot be understated. Crucially, blockchain and DLT are offering new prospects for SMEs in trade finance. Indeed, the digitization of trade finance and technology solutions offer new opportunities for banks and non-bank financiers to serve SMEs profitably. And this has changed the way we approach the trade finance gap. Events like today help highlight the potential of these technologies and help us inspire us to solve the most complex challenges in trade finance. We simply need to do more to build SME awareness of the new financing channels available to them, and wherever possible, expand access, particularly in emerging markets. So to respond to this challenge, in April, ICC will launch a platform which will be called ICC Trade Now. ICC Trade Now will be a dedicated online platform that will connect SMEs to innovative trade finance solutions. ICC Trade Now will help scale up and leverage game-changing products and services through tailored partnerships with cutting-edge solution providers. Our objective is to ensure that SMEs can harness the immense transformational power of digital technologies and access trade finance solutions that will help them seize new business opportunities. ICC is acting, and today I'm excited to announce our newest partnership with Tradeflow Capital Management, one of our founding partners under the ICC Trade Now campaign. ICC Tradeflow's innovative non-lending and non-credit-based instruments will provide SMEs with the right financial support to execute import-export trades in bulk commodities. We are confident that our partnership with ICC Tradeflow Capital, as well as other partnerships soon to be announced under the ICC Trade Now campaign, will actually create new tangible opportunities for SMEs worldwide. Friends, as we look to the post-COVID world, it has become increasingly clear that digital technologies will play a key role in rebuilding the global economy and in creating renewed economic opportunity for all. ICC looks forward to working with the World Trade Organization and with others to ensure that businesses of all sizes are able to reduce costs and maximize the benefits of the digital economy. We make business work for everyone, every day, and everywhere. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you very much, John. And let me now offer the floor to Yu Chen-Hong for the second keynote. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and Deputy Director General Yi, as well as Mr. Denton, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning, and thank you for inviting me to the 2021 Global Trade and Blockchain Forum. It's an extremely important topic, and I am very happy to join you to share Singapore's perspective on trade digitalization and some of our efforts on this front. I think a key issue on everyone's mind must be how we can all emerge stronger from COVID-19. I think the pandemic has caused unprecedented disruption to global economy and world trade. Deputy Director General Yi mentioned that just now. And I think the WTO forecasted that the world merchandise trade volumes would fall by 9.2% in 2020. Singapore too, as a very open trading economy, has also been affected, with our total merchandise trade falling by more than 5%. So the pandemic has definitely underscored the importance of digitalization for ensuring business continuity and, of course, speeding up trade recovery. To increase the level of digitalization, however, needs both the governments and businesses to move in concert. The 2014 report by the UN Economic and Social Commission, for example, estimates that just direct cost savings from cross-border paperless trade, just doing paperless, could be up to $7 billion annually. So I think for governments, what we can do is to align and to help harmonize many of these rules and standards, and perhaps in three very important areas. Firstly, harmonized policies. I think Singapore has been a very strong supporter of the work at the WTO, especially on the Joint Statement Initiative on e-commerce, of which Singapore is a co-convener. This is an extremely important initiative that helps to establish international rules, sets the benchmarks, and aligns standards that will enable as well as enhance digital trade. I think modern WTO digital trade rules that address core needs will create that open and predictable environment for businesses to flourish. We're also very heartened to see strong international interest in the JSI, with 86 WTO members participating actively, and this collectively represents more than 90% of global trade and represents all major geographical regions and countries at all levels of economic development. Secondly, harmonized legal frameworks. I think in our discussion, Singapore pushes for greater awareness and adoption of global standards, such as the UN Commission on International Trade Law texts, to facilitate that cross-border e-commerce. I think recently, just last month, we adopted the model law on electronic transferable records, or MLETR, into its Electronic Transactions Act. I think this brings the total number of jurisdictions to 3, and it is our hope that a lot more will join us on this journey. The third area will be the alignment to open technology standards. I think this is where we can coordinate with industry to actively contribute at standards organizations such as the UN Center for E-Business and Trade Facilitation and the International Standards Organization. For example, at the UNCFACT, we have the honor of leading a project looking into how technologies can be used to accomplish transfers of title that are compliant to the MLETR requirements. Another partner in our efforts is, of course, the International Chamber of Commerce through their Digital Standards Initiative. I think this close collaboration can be traced back to the MOI, which we signed on the sidelines of the 2020 WEF in Davos, together with 17 other industry luminaries spanning banking, logistics, insurance, as well as trading sectors. We all know that international trade can be staggeringly complex and fragmented because there are just so many different actors, and a single transaction can involve multiple parties in different countries. So therefore, it is very important that the government lean forward to help pull these 3 key areas that I mentioned so that these things do not function purely in silos. But this is sort of the today. Looking forward, let's now explore the core idea of how blockchain as a technology can really support trade digitalization. I think with blockchain, the possibility of immutability on a single source of truth can allow and to bring together siloed transactions in an interconnected ecosystem. I think that's why in the blockchain and trade publication by the WTO, we saw quite a number of blockchain projects, of which Singapore's Trade Trust is one of them. So how does Trade Trust aim to support trade digitalization? Trade Trust is designed to digitalize 2 types of documents: transferable documents and instruments like the bills of lading, as well as other normal documents. And we built it to be freely accessible to all, designed to help the industry platforms and systems interoperate seamlessly. It is open source and it is released as open source. And in some ways, it's our small contribution to that global capacity building. And for the global trade and technology communities, that means taking a lot of the hard work out of integrating that into the myriad of blockchains out there. And trade trust is really for use today. I think responding to our open invitation to use trade trust and its software components, numerous industry players are already using it. SWIFT, as the world's foremost banking network, is exploring how their multiple products, including the APIs at the core of financing, can plug into these components for their bank members. I think platform players like DLT Ledgers and Trumez are using these components in their solutions to work with digital transferable instruments like bills rating. Industry players, for example, our Pacific International Lines and our banking sector like the DBS Bank, are actively exploring its use to do the same. And we're also exploring trade trust to use it between governments for trade administration documents. At the World Customs Organization Asia Pacific Regional Workshop a few weeks ago, my agency, the Infocom and Media Development Authority, IMDA, did a joint presentation with Australia on how we're working together to explore trade administration documents such as certificates of origin can be digitally verifiable via trade trust. And we shared that a 3-week-long trial last December garnered extremely positive response from everyone involved. I mentioned that we're also using trade trust for commercial documents. For some time now, we've been collaborating with companies in Singapore to bring them onto projects with cities, for example, Shenzhen, as part of our Shenzhen Smart City Collaboration Initiative, as well as the Land-Sea Trade Corridor. And for example, with the Netherlands engagement involving the Port of Rotterdam and the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. I think in these projects, we work with businesses to use blockchain to conduct transactions so that they can experience firsthand what that paperless future will look like. So in IMDA, we sort of view ourselves as what we call the architects of Singapore's digital economy. And therefore, we are continually trying to push the boundary for how to use things like blockchain beyond today's purely financial realm. And we aim to catalyze that through also investing in research. For example, with the recent launch of our Singapore Blockchain Innovation Program to strengthen research capabilities in Singapore, in various industries. And I think there's a lot to be gained from that translation of blockchain to trade, logistics, and supply chain. I think one of these areas, for example, is decentralized identities, which is an important framework to verify the integrity of an individual or organization's digital identity. I think these are just some of our investments in blockchain innovation that I think demonstrates the potential as well as the commitment to ensuring that the world is much more digitally connected. So I think in conclusion, while trade and economic landscape as it stands today remains challenging, I think all of us are looking beyond the pandemic so as to emerge stronger, both as governments as well as businesses. And I think the move for trade digitalization is a key pillar. We must try and harmonize our policies, harmonize the legal frameworks, alignment to an open technology standard. I think these form the basic foundations for ubiquitous digitalization. And I think with open and neutral frameworks like trade trust, open source, open to everybody, and partnerships of all parts of the trade and technology ecosystem, I think we have a chance to influence the trajectory of digitalization and lay the groundwork for that future upturn and for the world to emerge stronger. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John, and you for your very valuable and interesting insights into the work being done by the ICC in Singapore to promote trade digitalization. And a big thank you to DDG for your continuous and precious support in pushing these issues at the WTO. Now, today's event will give us an opportunity to dig deeper into the various issues you touched upon in your keynotes, the trade digitalization, digital identity, regulatory framework, etc. So thank you very much for having set the scene for today's discussions. This is much appreciated. And I hope it will help guide our discussions today to explore what more can be done to promote trade digitalization and make it a reality in a not too distant future. So our first panel discussion will start in a couple of minutes to give enough time to speakers to come on board. So please don't leave us. And in the meantime, please join us for a virtual round of applause to thank our distinguished speakers. So thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll now move to the panel discussion. Thanks. So can I invite the speakers of the first panel to turn on their camera?
Hi, I'm unable to do that.
This is Atul speaking.
Yep.
Okay, you don't have your camera? It doesn't work?
It's disabled.
Okay, so let me check that. Okay, so while the technical team is looking into it, let us start because we're 2 minutes behind schedule. And I know that there's a lot to be discussed. So welcome to our first panel discussion, which is entitled Trading in a Pandemic, Trade Digitalization, a must-have still to be fully realized. So this first panel brings together a great mix of perspectives to discuss the issue of trade digitalization and the status of DLT projects in trade. And Michelle Chivunga will moderate the discussion. Michelle is a globally recognized blockchain professional. She is the founder and CEO of the Global Policy House and a senior advisor to several governments, including the government of Bermuda and the African Union. And she's been recognized as top 10 women in blockchain in Africa and one of the top 40 global FinTech for Good fellows linked with the UN. So over to you, Michelle.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And really fascinating listening to all the speakers so far. Firstly, I really want to take the opportunity to thank the WTO for hosting us today. Good morning, good afternoon, greetings to everybody around the world. It is absolutely fascinating to join you this morning. You know, as we following through the discussions that have been had so far in terms of painting the picture of what's happening across the world, it makes me kind of think back to 2019 when we held the first blockchain forum with yourself, Emmanuel, and the WTO, and what a time. And certainly things have really moved on and transitioned since then. Of course, we've heard about the impacts that COVID has had, across the world, and the fallouts of COVID, I think, will continue to hit many economies around the world as we progress. And it is really important that even though we're seeing signs of recovery, that there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done. And certainly, just giving a very quick overview of what's been happening around the world, from our work and our experiences at the Global Policy House, certainly we're seeing a lot of economies fighting back and really fighting back using, digital tools to do that. Of course, we're living in a what I call a VUCA environment, very volatile, very complex, very uncertain. And with that uncertainty, comes a lot of complexity. That is making a lot of countries, think again about how they do things. It's no longer business as usual, and the norm of doing things has really changed. I think with the introduction of with the implementation of digital tools and the unraveling of the digital economy. Now, in terms of building back better and looking at capacity building as a whole, it is very important, I think, as we move forward to really contextualize and understand, from the lessons that we've learned with COVID. At the surface of it, of course, there's a huge amount of innovation and digital transformation that has been shown. And it's really important as we move forward that we don't just think about it in the context of we've got all these wonderful digital tools, but actually understanding that economies, we have a number of people, for example, 50% of population has access to the internet, yet another 50% of people do not have access to the internet. So we cannot leave people behind. At the Global Policy House, we're really, really passionate about trying to close that digital divide and ensuring that we can tackle issues around things like digital literacy, and that digital divide I talked about. So I think there's no better time. I think trade, in trade, we've always known what the challenges are. I think trade really needs that injection of trust and greater transparency, visibility, and collaboration, across the trading system. And it is important as we move forward towards recovery, as we start thinking about building back better, that we really start to work more collaboratively across the world, be it around things like vaccines, making sure that, this is about, equitable vaccines that everybody has access to, really tapping on the innovations that are coming to fore. And we've seen this across the economies during COVID. Many countries with robust infrastructure systems, good investment strategies, and good national ID systems have been able to mitigate against the crisis and are really moving ahead to try and solve those challenges. So in summary, I think boosting digitalization is absolutely an absolute yes. And it's something that is already happening. It's something that, many players in our industry, especially in the blockchain space, there's a lot that is happening. I mean, having been in the blockchain space for, since around 2010, I can see the transition, I can see the growth, I can see the movement, but it's absolutely fundamental that we start to scale these solutions and we start to direct investment to the right areas. And with that quick summary, I think the time for trade is absolutely now. We know what the challenges are, be it around access to finance, as it has already been pointed out by the extinguished speakers earlier on. And I think it's about time that within trade, because trade is what really moves everything around the world. Trade is that avenue to create wealth for everybody around the world. It is important that we start to invest in trade and we start to innovate within trade and really bring trade into the 21st century. Looking at those laws and looking at harmonizing the laws and really trying to get everybody together. So I think, the time for trade is absolutely now. I'm very, very excited by the panel that I have joining us today. You've got a phenomenal lineup of people. And what I'll do is just briefly introduce each one of the panel members. And then we'll drive straight into it and start to explore what these digital emerging solutions are. That we can use and have been used already to tackle some of the challenges around COVID. And just to welcome my panel, I mean, I was fascinated there, when I was introduced to the panel as we're doing our chats, because of the diversity, to begin with, that diversity of people who are here, but that diversity of thought and creativity within the blockchain space is very, very exciting. And so just to introduce my panel before I bring everybody on. Netta Corinne, for example, is the founder and co-founder of Hexa and Orbs. Netta's group is Israel's one of the largest blockchain infrastructure company, and they've been doing some phenomenal work around blockchain. You soon hear about it. Then, of course, we've got James Zoll, who is from Louis Diffuse, and again, they're very well known for the work they've been doing, especially around the commodity and agribusiness space. Again, you hear much more from colleagues there. And from Louis there. Abba Schubert, again, the CEO of Dara, very exciting, and she has some insights around, what they've been doing around things like data, and really excited to introduce her. And of course, we've got Atul Patel. Atul is from DLT Ledgers and has been very active within the sort of just globally around looking at, cross-border trade and then trade and supply chain digitization as a whole. So very excited to hear from him and the work they've been doing around the world. And last but certainly not least, I think most people in the trade circles do know Deepesh Patel, who is the editorial director, for Trade Finance Global. Really fascinating panel. Please welcome them all. And it's great to have everybody here. Just to kick off, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we have faced, significant challenge, right? COVID has been brutal, I think is the best way to put it. And one of the areas that every economy, I think, is worrying about right now is actually when you're looking at, for example, the COVID vaccination, strategy and process and how that's going to evolve. I'll bring in Netta first. Netta, please, if you could just give us some insight into the work that you have been doing. What are the opportunities for blockchain to play a part, especially around things like the vaccine rollout and the distribution around vaccines? Netta, please, over to you.
Michelle, thank you very much. It's great to be here. A little bit of background on Orbs before I start my presentation. It's a public blockchain infrastructure designed for enterprise and large consumer applications. We're open and permissionless, and we use the proof of stake consensus. Now, my focus on ORBS is social impact projects. To that end, I established the Hexa Foundation as a nonprofit that aims to use our technology to further potential social impact use cases. And if we think about it, the COVID vaccine supply chain use case is a great use case, because this is really the first time on a global level we have incentive for a transparent supply chain, right? Every country wants to enable proper vaccine distribution to their population in order to prevent further death or economic damage. Now, if we take a look at the slide that I have up, this is a visualization of how supply chain is structured today. And the main problem with existing supply chains is that each manufacturer deploys its own separate solution. You can see that participants along the chain who wish to work with that manufacturer must integrate their platforms to the manufacturer's ones. Needless to say that no two manufacturers use the same platform, meaning that each distributor or hospital need to duplicate the process with every new agent that they work with. And this increases the overall complexity of the entire system. So the other issue is that you can see there's no room here for oversight by authorities. It's not possible to connect to every single system and receive visibility. So if I could have the next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the pain points that we're trying to solve, right? It's only been a few months since the COVID vaccines have been available on the market. We can see there are a plethora of mishaps and issues. The US government was trying to manually track 20 million vaccines that it sent to states. Scammers are attempting to sell fake vaccines, and we can even find entries for vaccines being bought and sold online. Now, we all know that with more time, nefarious actors will be more sophisticated and will try and profit from supply chain systems that just don't work well. In China, for example, this past month, local police arrested 80 people involved in a network of fake vaccines and seized 3,000 counterfeit vials. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, let's talk about how blockchain can add value. As you can see, the blockchain provides a highway of information. Everyone connects to it. It is one single infrastructure that allows everyone on it to be connected in some way to everyone else. All relevant authorities can see this data, which in normal supply chains, as you saw, that just cannot happen. Now, let's assume that every box of vaccine leaving the manufacturer has a unique QR code for scanning. And these codes also have the ability to determine temperature. So you can actually track the vaccine and its validity down to the very last vial, from the manufacturer to the person receiving the injection. And also importantly, regulators now have access to this data. They can get a holistic view of what regions or states are effectively functioning or where there's a problem. For instance, let's say vaccines weren't handled properly, they weren't stored at the correct temperature, or if goods were lost, fell off a truck, and were replaced by counterfeit products. Now regulators can see where this happened. Blockchain actually shifts the scale on so many supply chain related issues. Counterfeit identification, gray market imports, stolen good prevention, all of these aspects are very important when it comes to COVID vaccines. But there are also other added value propositions for blockchain that can improve efficiency in all industries and not just in COVID vaccines. Right now, for example, it's pretty well known that a significant amount of medical supplies delivered to hospitals are never used simply because the hospital loses track of them. In my conversations with a large medical device manufacturer, they admitted that they know that only 40% of their goods actually make it to the ER. Now, in this day and age, there's really no reason for this kind of waste. I think the corona pandemic wreaked havoc into our world, but perhaps it will also inspire us to become more efficient and more transparent on a global level. This is a time to prepare for the next pandemic. It will probably come. Let's hope that when it does, on a global level, we know how to deal with it. Thank you, Michelle.
Fantastic, Netta. Really excellent overview, and we can see the kind of shift when you start to introduce blockchain across the supply chain. So very, very helpful there. And certainly, I think there's quite a few companies, right, that are starting to explore, especially specifically around, the distribution of vaccines and how we can utilize technologies like blockchain, and even not just blockchain, but when you're starting to think about IoT devices that can be used, and that combination, convergence of those technologies and managing, be it temperature controls or whatever it is to ensure those vaccines are kept in the right place. So thanks very much for that. We will be, taking questions later on, ladies and gentlemen. So please feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. I will just transition to my next speaker, and then we will take questions later on. So please do keep them coming. I can see loads around data, loads around supply chain visibility there. But just to bring in, and Netta, thanks very much, and we'll come back to you for some questions. But just to bring in James now, James, I know you've been, very heavily involved in really ensuring that, that supply chain is flowing, right, through your sort of commodity activities, through your agribusiness, supporting things like food security, which is absolutely critical. I'd love for you to just give us a little bit more input into what you've been doing, what your experiences are. Have you had any major challenges during the pandemic? How have you gone about it? Have you utilized blockchain? What are you seeing in terms of progress around that space, please?
Thank you very much, Michelle. Hello, everyone. It's a great opportunity for me to share the user's case. So in the words probably as Michelle defined. But first of all, let me give a brief introduction about Louis Dreyfus Company and our background, our relevance to blockchain, our experience, and then the challenges we have been facing, especially during the pandemic era. So Louis Dreyfus Company is a leading global merchant and processor of agriculture products. Founded in 1851, we have grown and developed over the last 170 years to span the full value chain across many different product lines, including 8 platforms. They are grains and oilseeds, sugar, coffee, cotton, rice, freight, juice, and global markets. We are actively operating in more than 100 countries. By leveraging our global reach and extensive asset network, we serve the customers and consumers around the world. And we are always making every endeavor to deliver the right products to the right location at the right time, safely, reliably, and responsibly. And every year we originate, process, and transport about 80 million metric tons of agriculture products around the world. So during COVID-19, based on our own experience, we have seen the pandemic posed both logistics as well as operational challenges across the full supply chain. And this environment underlined the importance of utilizing technology for the resilience of the global trade flow, and the key role for ensuring business and supply chain continuity. In fact, the crisis has also accelerated the existing trend of digitalizations. And in this context, Louis Dreyfus Company, we have been able to leverage our global operation network, risk management, expertise, and market understanding to keep the essential food and feed supply chains moving, while we continue to invest in essential data science and analytical capabilities, which includes blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, in order to drive efficiency, security, collaboration, and sustainability. As Louis Dreyfus Company, we are the first in the industry to pilot by utilizing the blockchain platform to a soybean shipment, which we did with the Chinese customers. The shipment was from the United States to work with the partners to utilize the platform, which was a very successful demonstration that how we can use the technology to support the trade by improving efficiency, to ensure the transparency as well as the authenticity of the trade flows, to increase the speed, and also to make sure the integrity of the trades. And we also have piloted blockchain with our juice business by working with a Dutch supermarket so that we can provide all the data to the blockchain platform so that the consumers will be able to get all the insights, all the information along the full value chain. So this is another good example. So the pilot of the soybean trade flows was the base for the start of a joint initiative with the industrial peers to modernize the agri-commodity trade operation, the whole industry-wide, by utilizing blockchain technology to connect the major players along the value chain, the shippers, traders, and charterers. And we believe over time, this can expand to cover and include almost all the players from the farmers to the consumers. So after 2 years cooperation of work and the new blockchain platform launched in February this year as Covantis SNA, our primary scope covers the export of bulk commodities such as corn and soybeans from Brazil to global destinations, with hundreds of users from over 30 entities around the world. And all of us, including Louis Dreyfus Company, have been trained to utilize the platform. So in the coming months, Covantis SNA will work to enlarge the network by onboarding more participants and more industry players, and so that all of the participants along the value chain will have the opportunities. And looking further ahead, our company will continue to invest in the new capabilities that increase the value for our clients, for our partners from origin to destinations, creating global network for efficient execution of bulk commodities, especially the food, feed, clothing related commodities. So based on our experience, we believe that there will be really opportunities to help us. Maybe I can park later on. We can talk more along how we have improved efficiency, the transparency, ensure the data security, and drive the authenticity of the trades, and also help the world to ensure a fair global supply chain of the food products, which I think is important for the whole world. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks very much, James. That was really, really phenomenal. Thanks for the overview there. I think before I just jump on to the next speaker, because we've got sort of loads of questions coming in, I'm just going to point one at you. How do you, given that you're interacting with quite a few players across the supply chain, so how do you convince, sort of value chain partners, within the sort of trade circles to register their data on the blockchain? And how do you ensure that they're using the same data definitions, for example, and that data is comparable? So have you sort of experienced anything around that? What are your thoughts around getting different people kind of collaborating and coming together to work on that basis? This is a question from Virginia. Thanks for that question, Virginia.
I can take that question if you want, Michelle.
Oh, please, let's go ahead.
So, this is actually the most challenging aspect of blockchain, even though it enables multiple parties that don't necessarily trust each other to work together. Getting them together over the political hurdle of coordinating governance is probably the reason that we don't see the prevalence of many blockchain systems. And one of the reasons that I mentioned in my presentation that really the COVID vaccine supply chain gives you global incentive to cooperate, right? That might be the answer of how you push people to launch a system together. Because without this kind of incentive that everyone has to ensure the safety of their people and their countries, the political hurdle is indeed is very difficult to overcome. And that's a good question. That's what we're facing basically, and we're seeing in the industry.
Absolutely. And Nessa, there was a question for you as well in terms of, what are your thoughts around data protection, which, points to what you were, starting to say there. You know, what are your points around that? How do we ensure that there's a certain level of data protection in place? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, blockchain already has the highest levels of encryption. And I think the interesting thing about the way that the platform is built is that it's permissioned for what people are allowed to see. So suppliers will see a different amount of information than regulators see. Not all information is transparent for all, and I think that should provide a level of comfort and security for participants.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that, Netta. I think, you know, when we're looking at sort of data protection, and one of the areas that, you know, immediately springs to mind for me is also around, you know, data laws. I think it's quite important that as countries shift and start thinking very big around this digitalization agenda, is actually to think about what are the, you know, data laws in place, and how do those restrict or enable or protect data. I think is very important. That will also impact in terms of how we share data. Lots of questions coming in, but I am keen to bring in my next speaker as well. So just to bring in and introduce Abba. Abba, you know, you've been covering quite a lot around data more widely, but also you know, I really want you to kind of give us a picture of how do we deal with these interoperability challenges, right? So that we can reap the benefits of utilizing things like blockchain or technologies like blockchain. What are your thoughts around that? Please give us your views, and also feel free to just tell us your experiences during COVID and how you've kind of navigated this space.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Emmanuel and the WTO team for you know, including me and Dore. It's great to be a part of this conversation, because you know, as Netta was saying, and as that some of those questions highlighted, this is the sort of dialogue that's really necessary to get us to the next level. And Michelle, you hit the nail on the head. Interoperability is a huge factor, and I think to understand interoperability in those issues, we also have to look at the context. You know, context makes a huge difference. A smile can be friendly, or you know, it can be a threat depending on the situation. And the context of blockchain adoption in the global trade space is very broad. We've got, you know, on the one hand, sophisticated multinationals with, you know, long-term vision and the wallet to invest in the future, like James was just talking about some of the work of Louis Dreyfus. And we also have businesses at all scales, some of whom, as you were mentioning, Michelle, may not even really be, you know, digital in any sense. But a lot of businesses, big and large, that just want to do what they know because change can bring risk. So blockchain or distributed ledger exists in this broader context of digitalization and technology adoption and trade. So to get the most out of it, we've got to think about that context. At Dore, for instance, we're always listening to our customers because that's how we learn what they need. And there's no sense building great tech for trade if no one can actually use it. So early on, our focus with distributed ledger mostly revolved around its tamper-evident nature. You know, the foil seal on medicines, you can tell if someone has messed with it. So it gives a great audit trail. We saw a need for this and we built it. Companies using Dore can reliably report where inputs in their supply chain have come from and where their own products have gone. That's great. And it has important applications, provenance, control tracking, fraud around warehousing and collateral, which feeds right into finance. But once we built a system that can take all this information in and do stuff with it, we realized there were lots of other tools we can provide. And we learned this from looking at the context, talking to our customers about how their processes work, how they use technology. And we heard about this also from our keynotes about digitalization more broadly, what it can do for trade and global commerce. An example for us from Dore, we had a client who started using our system because they wanted to monitor inventories where things weren't always adding up. You know, as Netta might say, something was falling off the truck somewhere. And they used Dore for that quite successfully. Thank you, blockchain. No more fuzzy inventory, everything has to match. But they also ended up using Dore to manage their shipping calendar, to automatically generate documents. And they even changed some of their production processes because they were able to access data visualization features in Dore that led them to think of things in a different way, because they don't have data scientists on staff, but they were able to see something which gave them great management insight. So in the end, it was kind of a multi-pronged technology adoption. It was catalyzed by distributed ledger, but it pulled in lots of other stuff, because once you have well-structured data, you can do lots of things with it. Now, just to pivot back to distributed ledger, it has its own context. It has functions for now, and kind of what I think of as the functions for the future. I mentioned some of the functions for now around, the stability and the tamper-evident nature of the data structure. And the functions for the future really turn on interoperability of different distributed ledger systems with each other, because without that, it's hard to grow beyond a certain point. You have a bunch of islands and no bridges, as I think was mentioned earlier. So broadly, interoperability means how can different blockchains talk to each other? How can we pass data from one to another? They need a common language. That means data structure and protocols. Things are underway, like the WC3 standards that are emerging, as well as a common language. There needs to be some agreement on who is who. In other words, digital identities. And I think there'll be more on this on one of the panels later today. So context helps us understand where we are, and interoperability will get us to the future. Now that future, where everything is more efficient and resilient and great and automated, it doesn't just need technology interoperability. It also needs policy interoperability. Our keynotes were talking quite a bit about this, because the machine can't be better than the parameters we feed into it. We need continuing efforts to harmonize data requirements on global trade. It's one of the many areas of good work of our hosts today at the WTO, because supply chains need our help. It's a tough time right now. Over the last year, we've seen a lot of super efficient supply chains turn out to be super fragile. I'm sure James has seen a huge amount of this just in the shipping sector alone. Bulks are out of control. So harmonizing requirements across borders makes traders more resilient and more able to be automated. And this is through distributed ledger and beyond. And to that question that you mentioned, Michelle, from Virginia, it's exactly this issue. Who will do this? It's work, right? To build around an API, input data and transmit data. People need a nudge. They need incentives to get technology adoption to the next level. So I guess I see a need for interoperability between policymakers and the technology sector. We need each other to build that future. So I can go on, but you probably get the point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And 100% with you. I think, without that interoperability, we face a number of challenges. And of course, we're not just thinking about the technical interoperability between systems. Of course, we have some challenges around that. But even when you're thinking about blockchain, when you start to think about smart contract to smart contract interoperability, there's some challenges around that. But, that can bring in a lot of added value. And I know there's a lot of, developers and technical people really looking into that space and looking at things like API integration, as we've heard earlier on, and ensuring that, happens smoothly. But absolutely critical. I think one of the areas we haven't been as strong in terms of looking at is actually looking at that regulatory clarity and ensuring that, policymakers and, are working together and collaboratively across the spectrum. So you're thinking about regulators, you're thinking about, government officials, central bankers, whoever, and really trying to have that discussion around how can we ensure there's a certain level of interoperability, but also shifting from that, especially when it comes to trade and international trade, is also very much around looking at actually how can we ensure that country to country, we can be able to trade and do business, right? We can, handle settlements. We can look at a whole range of things. And just quickly before I move to the next speaker, maybe you can answer this question. And please, other speakers who are on, feel free to go into the chat and answer some of the questions. We've got a lot. It's a very popular session. So feel free to answer some of the questions that are in there. But one that I did want to point out is, why blockchain? We talked about encryption, right? And the cryptography that falls behind blockchain. but why should we, why blockchain? You know, should we, some of this stuff that we've talked about, can it not be done by sort of traditional, you know, systems and databases and all that? What makes it so special? Why is DLT so important, especially in the context of data? You know, the world is revolving around data. You know, gold and diamond is no longer as important as data. So, you know, why DLT, and what can DLT do to sort of secure and protect data?
Sure. So I'll jump in on that one. You know, the nature of the data structure of hashing and the level of encryption that, you know, Netta alluded to, and it's something that you can calibrate, of course, when you build these systems, is a little bit different from a traditional database. It is, of course, a type of database. And in a traditional relational database, you need someone central to administer that. So if we had, you know, the trusted, you know, data branch of the WTO, where all members of a multilateral institution can look to that organization which maintains this database and provides services around it, that would work too, absolutely. The risks around that are someone central has to be trusted by everyone and has to put the resources into administering this tool. And what we know from kind of looking at the history of innovation is when we have huge centralized actors serving as the administrators of key technology infrastructure, there's a risk of falling behind in innovation. So we can look at governments around the world, and some governments run very sophisticated electronic single window systems. And they put so many resources into that, right? It's properly expensive to maintain those things. So there are cooperation dilemmas around, number one, who can be this trusted, neutral, central authority that administers the database, and everyone looking to that database to see what is, you know, a true document, a correct document. They have to exist. They have to have the resources to put into it. And it's much easier to look at the incentives of, you know, these smaller actors and be able to create the infrastructure to connect them.
Fantastic. No, thanks very much, Abba. Really good answer. I know I'm conscious of time and we've got millions of questions, but I want to bring in Atu here. You know, Atu, I know you've been doing some incredible work across the world, especially in terms of looking at sort of, you know, trade and supply chain digitization as well, which is very much the topic that we're talking about today. So I'd love for you to just give us some examples of your work, you know, and by the way, congratulations for the raise. I know you've raised and been successful at the raise more recently. So congratulations for that. How can we scale, you know, what you're doing, right? Because I know you're operating around the world. Just a couple of weeks, I think both yourself and myself were at the South Africa conference as well. And I heard a lot about the work that you're doing with the banks and helping the banks as well to transition. So please do share with us, you know, some of your work and your ideas around scaling what we've got going on.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much, Emmanuel, for having me in this panel. It's my privilege to be here. I'm in sunny Singapore, and as our keynote speaker, you know, Mr. Casey Hong talked about from IMDA point of view, what Singapore is doing is really exciting. And, you know, John Denton, who talked about, you know, Digital Standards Institute, which is led by Oswald right here in Singapore, is also exciting. So I'm at the right place, in the right city, in the right sentosa here. So I'm just, you know, just feeling the moment here. So just a little bit about, if you could go to the next slide, just talk about what DLT Ledger is for those who are kind of coming in for the first time. It's really what I call a plug-and-play blockchain platform. And we have taken a different approach compared to the, you know, many other platforms out there, where we really look at from a lens of how do I reduce the lead times and delay in the cross-border trade and the supply chain transactions that are happening, right? And we identified there are 26 different types of trade that one would do, right? And these are just across what, you know, we have been working between the corridors of, you know, Asia and Africa and Middle East, right? Where we are doing most of our work. And
you've gone a bit faint, Atu. I don't know if it's just from my side.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Much better. Please go ahead.
Yes. So I was just saying that how do you improve the operational efficiency by really reducing the overall cost of financing for the buyer and seller on the trade, right? And it's really looking at optimizing the workflows, right, for the corporates, for their partners, and really in the end reduced in a journey a reliance on paper, phone, and email, right? So what we are doing here in Singapore, right, Electronic Transaction Act is a great starting point, but that's a good news. Not so good news is this is only, there are only a few countries who are doing so, right? So you need to make sure that you get support on the other end, but you need to have various stages in the adoption that you could really put through to the customer, to the corporate, so that you could see the benefit of digitization in the waves, right? So that's really where DLT Ledger is, and I think thank you so much for supporting us with the comment on thanking us on the raise. I think we are just getting started. We have got significant firepower in terms of the platform capability as well as the number of people who are in the platform. Interestingly, we kind of work with the corporates. One of the corporate told me that I have an SAP system and I have DLT ledgers, and that takes care of everything that I need to do for my cross-border trade execution. So that's kind of the space that we are in, and that kind of also alludes to some of the points that my earlier speaker made about looking at the parameters around which one would work, right? Looking at kind of complementing those parameters into a set of piece of smart contracts that you could kind of plug and play, allow the customer to configure it, providing them a plug and play environment for them to build the workflows around how the execution that they want to track. And then providing the banks, the financial institution, a platform to authenticate the commercial documents that they are getting from their suppliers, their exporters, their importers, and kind of digitize the interaction, because a lot of time that we saw is being spent between corporate to bank interaction, not just looking at checking the documents, but also the interaction could also be digitized. It could save some time and effort. So automating those multi-party transactions with other parties also coming in a collaborative way, so that you could just get started even with 2 parties. You could add a 3rd party, it gets better. We are divided 4 party, it gets even better, right? So that's really what DLT Ledger is. So if you could go to the next slide for me, just talking about, primarily as a collaborative platform where, we allow replacing emails, replacing WhatsApps, replacing phone calls, replacing courier to some extent, right, is really the area that we are working on. And there are significant inefficiencies when enterprises talk to other enterprises. The challenge is that you don't really know whom you are going to talk to, because someday you're going to talk to your trusted LE partner, someday you're going to speak to your SME partner. And then how do you kind of create that a true collaboration platform for a corporate is really where the vision of DLT Ledger is. And it's not just a distributed ledger, right? It is the combination of the machine learning, AI, and open API infrastructure available to you in a very simple, easy to use application that can be used in mobile. Remember, I think we had an opening comment which says that only 0.2% of the world trade is digitized today. I mean, that is a challenge to all of us in this call, because if it is just 0.2, even on 22nd of in the March 2021, where year of COVID has happened, we still only have 0.2% of the world trade digitized, right? So it is not so much about the technology, it's about, can I make it easier for someone to actually be on the mobile phone and do a particular task or an activity, which he cannot do today, right? So that's kind of where we feel the collaboration is a buzzword here, not so much as a blockchain or distribution ledger, right? If you could go to the next slide, just talk finally about what we feel are the areas where we kind of work together, right? From a corporate point of view, what are the use cases we work together with? So we use cases where people with authenticity into the documents, whether it's a PO or an SO or a certificate of origin or a guarantee or a bill of lading or any of the other documents that you are sending across the certification. And you need a provenance and track, right? So that's kind of the one area that we kind of aim to solve for corporates. Then we look at efficiency and cost reduction, right? So fundamentally, any digital software has to save your cost, has to improve your efficiency. And if you can get into that economics right, I think then we kind of hit the tipping point, right? And finally, I live in the world here where, huge number of SMEs, in fact, more than 90% of the SMEs in Asia are strapped and they don't really have access to financing. So we have been working very closely with ICC and ICC announced ICC Trail for Capital. We are already working very closely with IMDA to ensure that all of these SMEs which are out there, primarily in Singapore and the region, have access to this alternative sort of funds that's coming through, which typically are not served by the banks, because today Singapore is now increasingly becoming a capital for the alternative financials. And how can I actually provide an SME or a corporate to some extent better access to financing? So if a final slide in terms of introduction of us, if you can move to the last slide, Michelle, which talks about really looking at the use cases and the different waves that we could build with the customer, right? So, I mean, we talk about trade, and like I said, devil is in the detail. There are different types of trade, different types of origination, destination that one could work with, and there are different levels of maturity and authenticity that one could bring into table. So it's not everything is done on a day one. There is also interoperability that we talked about, but it's all about adoption. So we have got tons of work on adoption, which is really where we are feeling very happy that we get our customers to adopt us, because it's all about adoption. Second is about tracking provenance sustainability in the areas where you could actually deliver the value, right? Where somebody is willing to pay for that provenance and sustainability, that's the stuff that we could look at digitizing, not for the sake of doing it because I could now do it well. So there has to be an economic sense for provenance and sustainability, which we have seen in certain use cases and certain industry. Then looking at, corporates have spent tons of money in their digital system, but they still can't get the information out. They can't really have a simple questions answer. So how can you actually automate what you got into your ERP systems or your Salesforce systems? And how can you actually make use of that in your trade for an intelligent conversation? Supply chain finance tracking, which is, I think, an increasing topic, and it's really interesting now. How do you actually really track, and how to make sure that you're working with an authentic set of partners when you actually do a supply chain tracking, supply chain finance. And finally, in terms of DLT Nature being a network creator and a network builder, we allow corporates to build network. At the same time, we recognize that we need to connect and interconnect with other networks. So we work together very, very consciously to work together with other networks which are out there, which are successful, which are having adoption. And how can I actually kind of have a wave of this interconnection of network, which could increase our adoption from 0.2%, hopefully next year, Michelle, if you have this called, at least to the 2%.
Absolutely, absolutely. Atal, thank you so much. I mean, you've covered quite a lot there. I think, yes, absolutely, it's about adoption. It's about building trust. It's about enabling, trust. It's about digital trade, which you have been covering, and I very much, covering that. But it's also about, the small, medium enterprises that you picked up very well. A lot of the time, we talk about, what blockchain can do in very generic terms, but actually, if, blockchain, and it's not just blockchain in isolation, as you've said, it's very much about that combination of technologies to untap value, and ensuring that value actually reaches those small, medium enterprises is absolutely critical. Now, for me, I'll leave you with a bit of a challenge, and you don't have to address this now because, of course, of time. We talk, quite often about how banks are not sort of geared to support SMEs, but why not? Why are we not innovating, right? So that we can be able to actually support banks. Yes, we have to look at the laws around, sort of things like capital requirements for the banks so that, they're able to continue and all that. But it's very important, I think, as we move forward, that business is no longer as normal, right? We are transitioning. We have to be brave enough to say, actually, let's try and do something differently. So again, very, very leaving you with a bit of thought, and the audience with a bit of thought, that we do need to look beyond just the traditional means. If we're going to shift that percentage you talked about in terms of digitizing in trade, and start to think outside the box, and start to think about what other opportunities can we seek, be it around finance. And I'm talking about things like decentralized finance. I'm talking about things like, cryptocurrency, which a lot of people kind of don't want to talk about. But those assets are actually coming into play. And in fact, I think it was Citi who said, actually, is Bitcoin the new, currency for trade? Those kind of conversations need to be had, and we need to start to think about, actually, what are the alternatives? Are the alternatives fit for purpose? Do we need to regulate around the alternatives so that we can make them fit for purpose, so that we can serve those markets, right? Especially the small, medium enterprises, as you've said, around the world, in Asia, in Africa, 60, 70, 80%, are SMEs. So we need to look at SMEs. And with that thought, I want to really bring in my next speaker, Deepesh, who has been covering, a lot around trade around the world, and has done some phenomenal work, and has really been critical in terms of raising awareness around some of the challenges within trade, but also the opportunities, and especially around trade finance. Trade finance is something we talk about all the time. That 1.5, 1.6 gap, keeps kind of growing, right? But at the same time, there's new innovative ways of financing. Is there an opportunity, Deepesh, for us to start to explore a little bit better, to say, actually, what else is out there in terms of alternatives for finance? How can we, sort of digitize, but also innovate the trade finance space so that we can actually serve the markets, we can grow the markets, we can recover and build back better, we can transition and support those small, medium enterprises. So Deepesh, please do come in and give us your thoughts around what the work that you've been doing, especially around mapping what's going on with the trade finance projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks for your kind introduction and an excellent panel session so far today. And I really applaud the work that you're doing at Global Policy House, advocating the use of blockchain and DLT in trade. And also, I completely echo the works of this fantastic panel, Netta, on how public blockchain can be used to build trust in supply chains. James' work on blockchain to ensure inclusivity and transparency in GVCs for corn and soybeans, for example. Abba highlighting the importance of doing more stuff with data once systems are in place, and also Atul's work on reducing the time lag and delays in MISME financing through his platform. And I guess to your point, where's the innovation? Is it happening? It is, and hopefully this short presentation will show that. And actually, I think the world looks a lot different today than it did at the end of 2019, which is actually when we first published the periodic table of DLT in trade, and over a year's worth of progression has been both accelerated in some areas and also shunted by COVID-19. And we're still figuring out the widespread implications despite some recent successes in vaccine rollouts. Now, I just wanted to take a bit of a step back and look at where we've come in terms of trade tech, specifically DLT in trade in the past decade or so. And it builds on the publication that Emmanuel Gan and I launched back in November, entitled Blockchain and DLT in Trade, Where Do We Stand? And as discussed in today's session, we really are seeing forward progression. We quantified this progression a few months ago, which I'll talk about. We published an updated report on the entire landscape surrounding the use of DLT in international trade. And I guess here, I'm here to give a quick overview on the key findings, and we're honored to present it in today's Global Trade and Blockchain Forum. So just onto the next slide, the WTO and TFG conducted a survey of firms specifically operating in the DLT space, and the results of this research, which looked to gain a detailed understanding of the impact of the pandemic has had on DLT in trade, is really shown in this slide. And as you can see in the diagram on the right of this slide, we asked 54 respondents how the pandemic has impacted their plans and activities with respect to DLT. And I guess in line with the other recent 2020 ICC Global Survey on Trade Finance, The WTO's TFG survey indicates the majority of firms have experienced a positive and activities as a result of the pandemic, and we've seen work from home orders in many nations around the world. And banks and corporates have been forced to produce rapid digital solutions in order to remain operational. Now, the WTO TFG survey regarding the impact of COVID-19 on DLT trade, we also sought to understand some of the challenges facing these firms as they try to scale up their solutions, which is shown in the diagram on the left-hand side. It's interesting to note that legal challenges were rated as the most pressing than any of the other challenges. And this suggests the largest current challenge facing the deployment of DLT solutions across the industry relates to the lack of legal clarity and enabling framework that firms face. ICC noted that when fighting to overcome the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, most banks have not yet seen meaningful support from authorities to facilitate trade on digital terms. And I guess if the industry is to move to a more digitalized world powered in part by DLT, regulatory development really needs to keep pace with technological advancement. So now on to the next slide, our periodic table. So this is our latest periodic table of DLT projects in trade and trade finance. And for those of you who were here with us in person in November 2019 at this same forum in Geneva, a lot has changed since. And some of the projects that were viewed in the original version have fallen aside, whilst others have risen to take their place. And a few of the projects have progressed from consortium to an incorporated legal entity, enabling them to provide the full commercial services that they were previously unable to. And most projects, however, have made steady progressions towards their goals of a digitalized industry. And in this updated version, we focus on some feedback there. This updated version focuses again on the digitalization side of DLT and trade. And we've sectioned it into around 7 categories: so supply chain finance, trade finance, know your customer, insurance, DLT, digitization of trade documents, shipping and logistics, supply chain, and other initiatives for projects that don't fit neatly into those other sections. And similar to the previous edition, each project is presented with its underlying technology, as well as an evaluation of its current stage of maturity. Now, the most important part of this is at the time of initial publication, so back in November, the average stage of maturity across all the projects was profiled to be 2.3 out of 5 in 2019, with 1 representing proof of concept, so very early phase, and 5 representing live and running or well established. And back in November 2020, so nearly a year later, the average maturity has risen to 3.3 out of 5, which means the average project is between the early stages of production and being live and running. And this rise in the overall maturity indicates that despite some challenges amongst individual initiatives, the industry as a whole has been steadily progressing in a forward direction. So on to the next slide. According to our surveys, a lack of standards is viewed as one of the largest challenges facing DLT and trade initiatives, and we've brought it up several times on the session today. And to help address the challenges created by a lack of standards, developing and implementing globally accepted digital standards for trade is really a necessary step. And we identified the main initiatives working towards standardization in this space. Now, some standardization projects are focused on particular sectors or geographies, whilst others are a bit more general. Some are, of course, spearheaded by large international organizations, others by private companies. I think any discussion of standardization in a digitalized trade world would not be complete without mentioning the importance of regulatory framework, which we're talking about later, and building that harmonized regulatory framework. And a key actor in this respect is the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, or UNCITRAL. And whilst this isn't a standardization body, it plays a key role in working to build a harmonized international trade law framework, which will help drive that progress. So I guess just to conclude, today we're beginning to see the ideas of DLT and trade coming to fruition. And the past year or so has brought many, many changes to the space. This year is on pace to do the same. And with the continued work and dedication that we've seen from across the entire industry, working on at the intersection of digitalization and trade, progress will be made. Back to you, Michelle.
Fantastic. No, thanks, Dipesh. A great map up there. I think, I'll bring back the rest of the panel now because I have a couple of questions. There's loads of questions in the chat, and we might not get to all the questions, but, a lot of the panel members are sticking around and might be able to pick up some of your questions later on. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's quite a series of sessions following us that will pick up on some of the questions that we don't pick up. So the question from Louise around, changes around the bills of lading and the different documentation. We have a session coming up which will go into in depth into that. Totally agree with you. I think, innovating around the documents will make a huge difference, but it is not just about the documents. And again, there was a question around, actually, let's not just focus on the documents. How can we innovate and maybe play around with smart contracts, for example, to digitize the other elements, things like trade AI and stuff like that we can look at. So some of those will be covered as we go along. But I find one question particularly interesting here, so somebody has asked, what is the current kinds of digitization journeys for countries around the world, especially in relation to single windows? Right? Are the governments around the world or members of the WTO, responsive to the ideas of blockchain, responsive to the ideas of innovation? Where are we in terms of, looking at that? I throw this out to the whole panel. What are your thoughts around, actually, is blockchain actually delivering? Right? When I sort of entered the industry in the early days, loads of people looked at me like I was a mad person for even talking about blockchain or Bitcoin, right? So where are we actually? Is blockchain delivering, or are we still having those conversations, and are we still kind of sucked into the hype? What are your thoughts around that?
And Michelle, if I can jump in on that one, I'm sure we all have a lot of thoughts on this, but to me, it comes back to this view I have of there's blockchain for now and there's blockchain for the future. And it's kind of like saying that, so some people may say, well, blockchain isn't delivering, but I would say it is. And there are the things it does now around the tamper evident nature of the data structure and what we can do with that today, even when we don't have connections between our digital islands to really unleash the power of smart contracts and things, because that takes evolution in law in a lot of countries to make those legally binding. But saying that because there's still a lot of payoff curve in the future that we shouldn't worry about it is kind of like saying we shouldn't think that the internet is a great tool, even though 50% of the population doesn't have access yet, because of course it's a great tool and we've got to build together toward that future.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on that, Netta?
Well, I'm a little bit less optimistic at the moment. One of the things the Hexa Foundation does is work together with governments to educate them on the added value of blockchain technology. And while I've seen an eagerness to learn and have also deployed successfully pilot, for example, in one of the world's largest development banks, the follow through after pilot stage seems too big of a leap at the moment for governments or institutions to take. And I think it has to do, again, with what we were discussing in the past, the political hurdles that need to be overcome in order for everybody to work together and govern a platform, or even in order to just get the multiple parties to embrace it and work together. I do believe that 10 years from now, the technology, or maybe even 5 years from now, the technology will be much more prevalent than it is, and maybe a crisis such as what the world has been going through recently will push us in that direction. But I'm not seeing government embracing right now.
Thank
Michelle,
you.
if I can just jump in, right? So Singapore has talked about with the 17 countries what they call digital economic partnership, right? So I think one of the ways this problem can be solved is really looking at the like-minded governments and like-minded trade routes who are happy to digitize. So one classic example is Singapore and Australia Digital Economic Partnership Agreement. That's already been signed by Singapore and it's already in operation from January this year. So it's much more easier for us to automate the trade goals from Australia for transshipment out to the rest of the world. And you could actually then see, that single window equivalent of effect happening in that area, right? Second could be that ASEAN Economic Committee or a single window on ASEAN could work if the countries around are kind of working together for the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement. So I think I do see I'm a bit more optimistic than Netta in terms of seeing that there would be certain origination and destination panel of countries, if you will, that will emerge that would basically be taking this digitization forward. And I don't necessarily believe that it has to do with the blockchain. It has to do with those processes being set up in those countries, the adoption. I think the technology is proven, technology is already there. It is a combination of technology that makes the solution work. And I think then it's about those trade pairs, the countries that could make it happen, is what I feel. So I think we also need to change the dialogue a bit to go back to regulatory and say, they always blame it on blockchain, but it's nothing to do with blockchain. If you have this agreements going between two countries, then I can happily do that because technology already exists.
Thank you so much, Atu. I mean, we could go on and on, guys. I love the debate going on.
Maybe
and
I can share a little bit our observation based on our experience.
Sure, please. Sorry, James, before you do that, what I'm going to do is, because we're obviously running out of time, is I'll let you go and have your closing statement. And please, through your closing statement, if there's one word that you can use to describe what the future looks like, please do so. And what I'll do before I let all of you come with your closing remarks is I want to just give it a quick sum up of what we've heard so far. I think absolutely, governments have to, embrace and really engage with the decentralized world, put it that way. Within the decentralized world, you've got a whole range of different technologies, emerging tech. If COVID has shown anything, it's very much that, the digital economy has a lot to offer, but that digital economy cannot function on its own. We do need that regulatory, clarity. We need the regulators, we need the governments, we need all these players to come together. I believe the two worlds, which is the digital economy as well as the traditional economies, can coexist. And actually, we can reap a lot of value from those two economies. So very, very important that we do engage, that governments start to interact. And certainly, look at the continent of Africa and the policy shifts happening there with the free trade area. And certainly there's a lot of innovation that's already being, involved. A lot of conversations about how do we come together and utilize that combination of technologies like Atu was saying. So there's a lot of momentum, and I think it's fantastic. I'm very optimistic. I always have been when it comes to blockchain and the digital economy and digital assets, because I see a future there, and certainly there's a lot of work to do around that. But just to sum up, I really want to thank everybody, for all your questions. We'll get to them. I know the next panel is waiting to jump on, but just quickly rounding up everybody, please, give me your closing remarks and one word that you want to describe the future. Thank you. James, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Michelle. I think one word is collaboration. We have already embarked on the collaborative projects. I think blockchain and technology needs collaboration across the world.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. Netta?
So I would say transparent. I think we are sick and tired of not knowing what's going on in large organizations or in governments. And I think blockchain as a technology offers us that transparency, and I believe we'll have it in the future.
Fantastic. Deepish?
For me, it's necessity. Digital trade is no longer a nice to have. It's a must. Don't get left behind.
Thank you. Atu?
Yes, I would echo James. It's a collaboration.
Thank you. And Abba?
Yeah, so a slightly long-winded way of saying I'm with James and Atul on collaboration. Innovation needs space to grow, and technology needs investment to become widely adopted. Investment needs stability. So how do we get between that space that innovation needs and the stability that investment needs? And that's the collaboration that comes with public dialogue and policy building.
Thank you so much. And it's a wrap, guys. I think we can go on forever, but it's a wrap. It's fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Really great to have participated in this panel. I thank the panel, great panel, very experienced people. And please do reach out to the panel, and I will hand over to Emmanuel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists and to you, Michelle, our moderator for this session. Thank you all for a very, very engaging and insightful discussion on the importance of transparency of supply chains, initiatives taken to digitalize trade, reduce the time lag, on opportunities it opens for MSMEs, on challenges such as interoperability and scaling. So a big thank you. You really set the scene remarkably for the rest of the day. We're going to dive deeper into these issues in the other sessions we'll have. So we'll now have a very short break to allow the speakers of the second session to come forward. The next session will be digitalization in support of trade finance, and we touched upon these issues in this current session. So the session will start in less than 10 minutes at 55 past the hour. So don't leave us. We have some excellent experts in the fields who will present some of the exciting blockchain projects on which they're working to help make access to finance and trade finance easier using blockchain, and especially for MSMEs. So see you in a few minutes for the next session. Thank you.